One thing I always wondered when I was little is how this could represent what the heart is doing. How can someone look at this and tell what's happening in the heart? First thing you need to remember is about the polarity of the plasma membrane. We have a sodium-potassium pump in the plasma membrane. What does this protein do? It pushes 3 sodium ions to the outside while simultaneously bringing 2 potassium ions to the inside. Each time it does this, it creates an extra positive charge on the outside compared to the inside, and as a result, the inside becomes relatively negative. We say then that the membrane is polarized. To depolarize the membrane, we open a sodium channel. The sodium that was outside, eager to get in, enters along the concentration gradient, and the inside becomes positive relative to the outside because now both sodium and potassium are on the inside. So this here is a channel. We say then that the membrane is depolarized. Now, to put positive on the outside and negative on the inside again, we're going to open a channel, this time for potassium. So this here is a potassium channel, and it's going to let the potassium out. All this positive charge comes out. The outside becomes positive again due to potassium, and the inside, by comparison, will become negative, similar to the initial situation. We'll say then that the membrane is repolarized, and then the sodium-potassium pump returns everything to its initial state. The other thing you need to know about is vector decomposition. Folks, I thought I'd never see physics again after entering medical school. Yeah, it's not quite like that. So you have the x and y axis here in the plane, and you can have a vector here, for example, and you can decompose that vector into its x and y components. If I trace this out here, you can see how everything is very proportional. You can talk about the original vector, or you can discuss its components. You don't have to limit yourself to the plane. You can do this in 3-dimensional space as well. Here you have the x, y, and z axis with any vector here. And you can project that vector onto these 3 spatial components. You've got an x component, a y component, and a z component. The electrocardiogram is basically a decomposition and recomposition of vectors, but instead of using 3 axes, you use 12. What's happening here? Each sensor or electrode that a person attaches is like an axis that helps decompose the heart's depolarization vector. So you'll have axes like little eyes looking from different angles, from here, from below, from this side, that side, and so on. The person is essentially being observed from multiple points. Now, how does heart depolarization actually work? The whole process starts roughly here, in an area called the sinoatrial node. Depolarization begins in the atrium and spreads throughout it, with the atrium depolarizing first. So, on the ECG line here, I'm looking at it from this perspective. As this process is happening in this direction, from this angle, you'll see the stimulus intensity increasing. It increases and then decreases. So, if we break this down along this axis, you'll notice there's a small component of positive intensity here. And the whole process continues until it reaches this point where there's a delay. So, there's no intensity at all, 0. Then the myocardium starts to depolarize from the septum. First from the septum in that direction. The resulting vector will be something in this direction here. So it'll be a negative vector, a negative component in our observation here. So we'll put a negative here, and then it starts to become positive again as it begins to depolarize this region here. Since this side of the heart is much larger than this side here, the resultant vector will be towards this side. So you'll see a very strong resultant because there's much more muscle in the ventricle than in the atrium. Therefore, the intensity will be very high, and you'll see the final depolarization of the ventricular muscle. So this pattern will continue to rise here, and then it stops. There will be a phase without any polarization, neither depolarization nor repolarization. And then the heart, specifically the ventricle, begins to repolarize, and it repolarizes from the inside out. So the intensity will be positive as well. So it goes and repolarizes everything again. What about the atrial repolarization? The atrial repolarization is happening at this moment here. However, since the ventricular depolarization is so much more intense, you have a very large intensity in this direction and a small intensity in that direction, so the resultant will still be towards this side. Therefore, you don't see the atrial depolarization. The atrial repolarization is masked by this region here, which we call the QRS complex. The Q wave, R wave, and S wave, which we call the QRS complex here, will be so much more intense that it obscures the atrial repolarization. And why do you need so many axes, so many points of view? Because here it's showing you time in this direction and intensity in that direction. But it's not showing you all the directions, it's showing you in relation to just one point of view. When you use multiple axes, you can trace the electrical pathway of the heart through space. And if I have, for example, let's say a necrosis in an area, a heart attack or something like that, this region doesn't depolarize and the vector intensity will be different. In this area it'll be smaller, and through all those different viewpoints you can see exactly where, for instance, a heart attack occurred. So that's it, folks. If you enjoyed this, give the video a thumbs up. See you next time.